Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review the original Tremors. So, the one thing as I'm talking to you, the person that is to be able to review this, and I really appreciate that, the one thing in my mind that pops out when I'm immediately having to talk about this film is Kevin Bacon was to go on through GQ and talk about his most iconic characters. And this movie just so happened to pop up. So, Kevin Bacon was to go on and talk about this movie on how this movie went into theaters and it didn't do all that well. But then weirdly, this movie turned around and became like a huge cult classic of a movie where VHSs, people renting this movie and buying this film and whatever. Like, this movie was a huge hit. Eventually, I'm assuming once this movie went on to TVs everywhere, people were like, oh my god, I thoroughly enjoy this movie. To the point that it became the massive franchise machine that it has. I have probably seen up to Tremors 4, and then I gave up because I'm like, like the last one I watched was like the Western movie, and I'm like, no, no. I think I'm done with this one. But I don't know, like, they keep churning out these bad boys, so I'm just kind of wondering, like, how are they keeping people's attention? Like, they're going into these odd, bizarre locales to film these things, but I'm like, how exactly are they still doing these? How are they coming up with the money? We had Kevin Bacon who was asked to do Tremors 2, and Kevin Bacon was like, no, like, I'm not going to do this sequel because it just didn't do all that well in theaters. So, we have it where in the sequel film, we had Ed Bass come back, the guy who's Fred Ward, who is to be kind of the opposite guy of Kevin Bacon. And so he ends up coming back to the sequel, and then the guy who ends up playing Bert kind of carries the franchise for however freaking long until they have a Western, and still I think Bert is still in that movie as a flashbacking ancestor of Bert, I guess, for some reason. So, and then I think that he just continues to be in these movies for, hey, they keep giving me checks, I keep coming. So, eventually in the Tremors franchise, they start adjusting to try to get away from the whole underground Tremors thing. They eventually have it to where the the Graboid goes on and gives birth to smaller Tremor creatures, and they go on and they try to track people with heat vision. And then I think eventually there is a Tremor that has wings, but I'm not 100% sure about that. Don't quote me because I don't remember all that well of the modifications of Tremor creatures, but I think that's what eventually happens in one of these films to just kind of weirdly up the ante for some bizarrish reason. So that way there's no way that anybody could get away from these Tremor creatures. But yeah, so I can really enjoy this Tremors movie, even though, of course, you have the line that not only is to be done once, but twice, with the whole mother humper thing, which I'm like, I'm going on Netflix and I'm hearing the word mother humper. I'm like, wait a minute. Like, what? Could they not have only said a cuss word after they say excuse my French? Uh, What kind of goofy weirdness is this? Like, I get it. They probably had to carve back some cuss words so that way they can get a certain rating for this film. But like, come on, really? We really have to go with the cuss word count to go for the rating of this film to adjust the rating. So going into this film, I can have a lot of fun with this movie. It kind of reminds me of when movies used to a while ago used to try to have monsters coming from the underground, or they would have to have this like weird, bizarrish like cave or tunnel or some kind of something that would always be underground. Like we would have chuds that are in the sewer. If you guys ever heard of the Chud movie, it's actually a pretty decent film, and it has John Goodman in it, and it has the two guys from Home Alone, as I always like to say. I don't know why I reference Chud so much. It's not that I'm like desperate to try to get that video of you. It's no, like I'm just like, no, I just like that film weirdly, bizarrely, and I probably shouldn't. So, but pushing on. So, yeah, like I like that whole concept. I think at one point we did have in some shark movie, there is to seriously be this like sand shark movie where we ended up having like a shark that kind of like made his way through sand to go and kill people. Why? Every like they just have to create everything. And every once in a while I'll eventually find a movie that has that kind of Tremors feel, but it's been a while. So with that said, let's go out of our way to go into that double five. Let's just otherwise go into spoilers about this movie because it's about that time yet again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time we get to spoil this movie. So we end up having at the very beginning of this film, we have both Valentine and Earl waking up for their day, and so we end up having Valentine giving Earl a cigarette, and so we go on and we have them debating about what breakfast they had. Valentine is to mention that they had eggs, and or no wait, Earl is to mention that they had eggs. Valentine is mentioning that they had, I think it was like beans or something, and so they go on and they paper rock scissors for who is to make breakfast, and Valentine loses, so Valentine is to, of course, make breakfast, and so Valentine is telling Earl like, well, hey, like you should get a better memory so that way you can remember who made what breakfast. I think it's just like Earl doing that so he can get out of making a meal at some point. So we go on and we have these two characters uh, go off and drive on to figure out what they're going to be doing for the day. And they can barely even remember what day of the week it is because they're end up talking about like, well, hey, like I'm always a step ahead of you. I'm always uh, planning uh, for Wednesday on a Monday, and today's Monday. Is it Monday? So we have them go on, and they mention that they're gonna go and it's trash day, and it's the day where they have to go and dig something out, and Valentine is saying it's like, hey man, I don't really want to dig out uh, that thing. And so Earl is going on and saying it's like, well, hey, like we don't dig that out, then we don't get paid. So they have Valentine, Valentine. Valentine and Earl use this bulldozer to go and dig this thing out for this person, so that way they can get paid. And so they end up going into town to have this septic tank to get this septic tank from or they end up taking this hose from the septic tank to go into Melvin's shack. And so they go on and they say like, hey Melvin, shouldn't you be the one that's doing this, because it's technically your crap. And so all of a sudden, while the guys are to adjust this septic tank, all of a sudden we end up having this like septic tank like spouting and spraying all over them. And this spray is to seemingly look like crap, but actually it looks like oil to me, weirdly, because it's black. It's not brown, but it's whatever. So we we go on and we have both Valentine and Earl go on to meet with Bert and Heather, who is Reba McEntire here. So we have Bert going on, and oh no, wait, maybe we have yeah. Um, well, I'll finish this part anyways, and then I'll get back to the one scene here. So Bert and Heather are mentioning about how somebody's going to strike oil here at some point and take this town away from them because it's public domain. And Valentine and Earl are thinking that Bert is going to somehow uh, be connected to World War III. And so we go on and have like them talking it out. And so it seems we have this store owner, I think it's Walter Chang, who is to mention about some machine of his who's acting up, and they're trying to figure out what the problem is. And they're like, I don't know, I'm not sure. So of course, Bert is to go on and talk about that grad student. So we have Valentine and we have Earl go off to see this grad student who's doing some seismology studies. If anybody has seen Ghostbusters Afterlife, like, you basically know what that means. That's basically Tremors, or like, I don't know what it is with seismologists lately. There's a lot of those just cropping up in a number of things lately. I don't know why. So especially with what I've reviewed, I don't know how many times it feels like I'm going and like, oh, here's another seismologist character. I don't know why. So maybe it's just coincidental, or maybe I don't even realize that I haven't seen enough seismologists. But anyways, so Valentine and Earl make their way to this grad student, and we have Valentine who's like, oh my god, like, this woman better be blonde, have big honkers, and be having legs for days. And so Earl is going on and saying, it's like, well, hey, like, this woman isn't probably gonna be like the one girl that you had before. And Valentine is to coincidentally have this one uh God, what is it, the door, or the door, the windshield blocker for the sun. He ends up having that down to see that we have some cluster of Valentine's photos of old flames. So all of a sudden we have both Valentine and we have Earl go on to meet this grad student, And this woman has like her whole nose just covered in sunblock, and she's wearing these clothes that aren't exactly the most like ooh wee, this woman looks just like she's not putting on a show because she's the only one out here. So we have Valentine, we have Earl just kind of looking at this girl, and they're like, so, but Valentine is going to go after this girl anyways because this town of perfection is what it's called only has like 14 some odd people. So Valentine better not start to get picky anytime soon because freaking there's only 14 people in this town. So Valentine and Earl are talking to this grad student, and so the grad student is mentioning about like, hey, is anybody doing any drilling or any blasting lately? And evidently Valentine or Earl have no clue that there's some construction workers going on and they're using jackhammers to be drilling because evidently conveniently like these guys don't know what's going on in their town. So we have Rhonda who's asking these two about like, hey, drilling or blasting, and Valentine is telling Earl it's like, well, you realize that means uh like construction stuff, right? Is there some kind of other hidden lingo going on here? So Valentine and Earl is saying like, not that I know of, and Rhonda's like, well, that's weird because like it seems like she ends up keep continuing to get activity here, and she needs to try to figure out like how this is at all happening, and she doesn't want her like stuff, her studies to go to waste here, and like she also wants to like hope that it's like it's not some hoax, or like yeah, she'll just waste all the time that she's been here kind of going in and checking what these things are, what these whole seismographs are doing. And so we have Valentine and Earl going on to town to just try to figure out if they can find out what's going on in town. And so Earl is telling Valentine, it's like, well, hey, we can probably help her with her seismographs. And Valentine's like, dude, we don't know what we're looking at with any of that stuff. And Earl is like, well, yeah, but like, there's a way to kind of break bread with her. And like, Earl is just kind of looking at Valentine, and Valentine's like, So we have them go on into town. And so while they're heading on into town, they end up finding some drunk, or a guy that they know is drunk, on some electrical, uh, God, what is the word? Uh, Electrical tower? There we go. Good enough. So they go and they are to think like this guy's drunk. He's not listening to a word they're saying. And so it's some guy named Edgar, Edgar Deems. So they go on, and so Kevin, of course, is to get this short straw again while they're kind of paper, rock, scissoring it. And so Kevin goes, or Valentine goes to retrieve Edgar to find that he is dead. And so they end up taking this guy's body to the doctor here and saying it's like, well, hey, like he died from a heart attack, right? And the guy's like, no, he died from dehydration. And they're like, wait a minute, what? Like, that means that this guy would have had to have been up there for a couple days. And they're like, and he's like, yeah, like he was stuck up there for whatever reason. And it's like, soup. So We then also transition to have a guy named Old Fred. Old Fred is to have this farm with a crap ton of sheep, supposedly about roughly 20 to 21 sheep. And so Old Fred is going and kind of hoeing up his garden. And so all of a sudden, Fred is to go on and just be hoeing away at his garden, to all of a sudden notice that all of his sheep are to be killed off here, torn to shreds. And then so old Fred is to all of a sudden just go right back to just hoeing away, just like, what the heck is going on? All of a sudden, for old Fred to get dragged under the ground, and the only thing left to him is his head. So we end up having uh oh I was trying to think of what is the next kill here. So eventually we have it where Earl and Valentine and yeah, I think Ed and Valentine end up or Ed Earl and Valentine end up finding old Fred and they end up finding his head. And so now they're thinking like, oh my god, like there's a murder on the loose, somebody's chopping heads off. And so we now have it to where both Earl and Valentine are telling these construction workers about this, that there's some killer on the loose, and just kind of be on guard as this one guy is kind of jackhammering away. And the one other construction worker, Howard, is going and grabbing this kind of uh, this crowbar, and he's like, if anybody comes here, I'll give him a big huge lump on the head or something. So all of a sudden we end up having Carmine, who is kind of jackhammering away, to all of a sudden jackhammer into a tremor or graboid. I want to call him Tremor so badly. Carmine ends up going and jackhammering into a graboid, and then all of a sudden the graboid is going on and dragging this jackhammer along with it. And then all of a sudden we have Carmine, who is to also get kind of hooked onto this jackhammer and be dragged all the way to some spot where he eventually is to get eaten. And then Howard is to eventually notice, because of this jackhammer, that all of a sudden these rocks are now coming at him and are crushing him. So, and we eventually have both Valentine and Earl finding these guys later when they end up trying to go and leave for the town, or leave to make their way out of this town to try and find help, to find police. Because when both Valentine and Earl go to town and are explaining to everybody what's going on, and they of course are to explain that people are getting killed, they're like, well, if anything, we don't have a good way to communicate with people because the mountains are to give them problems to try to communicate with the outside world, because weirdly the mountains are to be some kind of weird like some weird thing that I guess they can't make outside radio calls for whatever reason. So now we just have it to where they're going, it's like, well, the only thing that we can possibly have you guys do is take your truck and drive out of town to eventually get outside help to come here. And so everybody, of course, is to be on guard. We have both Bert and Heather, who are, of course, to like be like an arsenal. They're like, they have this whole room that is to be just filled to the brim of guns. And so we have Valentine and we have Earl go and try to drive out of town. And that's when there's to be this rock slide there. And so that's when they find a construction worker hat with blood on it. And they're like, oh my god, the killer must have gotten here. And we had Valentine and Earl who were thinking that the construction workers were the cause of this whole rock slide. So we have Valentine and Earl kind of trying to drive away, but we end up finding out that one of the graboids is to try and stop them from getting away, but they conveniently are able to. So once Valentine and Earl make it back to town, they're like, hey, like, why are you guys still here? And they're like, hey, yeah, we can't leave. And all of a sudden, as they are to make their way to this truck, they end up spotting something unusual. And so they go and they realize that there, of course, is to be some snake-like thing on this, of course, truck. So they go and they pull it off and they inspect it and they're like, this must be whatever this weird thing is. So we now go on and we have this kind of one random couple who, of course, ends up getting killed next. And I'm trying to... okay. We have this couple who are... I think they're camping. I could be wrong about that. But we have this couple who are going on... Oh, no, wait. I think they're going on vacation. And they end up having this generator that goes underground because the generator is making so much noise. And so the generator ends up going underground, and so Jim is to go after it to try and pull it out to eventually find that something had possibly eaten this generator. So, and we have Jim who's thinking that maybe there's some kind of underground cave here, or maybe the generator just fell through. But speaking of falling through, we have Jim who ends up getting eaten by this graboid next. So all of a sudden Megan is running to her car and is to accidentally turn on the radio. And so now this graboid has decided to take this woman's car and bury her underground. And we again eventually have both Valentine and Earl eventually finding this car underground and eventually realizing that, like, it always seems like nobody's here. So we then go on and realize that eventually these guys are going to have to just one, have that grad student like get back to this group. And so once she ends up getting back with the group, because what ends up happening is when Valentine and Earl make it to Rhonda, we eventually have to forcibly have them go on and like pole vault their way to getting back to, of course, Rhonda's truck, because Valentine and Earl's truck ends up getting their tires uh, like killed. The truck ends up getting taken down. So we have these characters going on and pole vaulting their way, and so they get on to this truck, and we also have the moment where like I'm trying to maybe there's one more moment here, because I know that both Valentine and Earl are to make their way with horses to eventually try to leave this town, and they don't get that far. And no, wait. Let's back up a little bit. Let's back up perfectly, because I think what happened here is that they make the decision to want to go and get the grad student, and that's eventually when they realize that they need to go on horseback to see if they can make it to this girl, and the horses end up getting consumed by this uh, graboid, and then they realize that the monsters are underground, and so once they go on and they eventually meet with the grad student, they go on, and I think they have to pole vault through a certain location to make it to her truck. But before that, we end up having them go and run to this concrete like ditch. And so when they run to this concrete ditch, the Tremor ends up bashing his head into this concrete wall of sorts, and one of the Tremors ends up dying from that. And then they decide that they're like, oh, okay, well, there's seemingly another graboid here. And so now they end up having to go and make it to this one rock. But the graboid is to continue to just stay there. And so now they end up having to forcibly pole vault their way all the way to get to, of course, uh, uh, Rhonda's truck. God, is there so much stuff to just unpack in this film? And there shouldn't be. It's an hour and a half film. It's really easy. It's simple, but like I'm also like really tired here, so you're getting tired version of review. So we have Rhonda going in and forcibly driving her car weirdly, because half of her body is in the car driving. And so they end up getting away from these graboids. And so, like, Valentine and Earl are kind of high fiving. They're like, yeah, we did it. And Rhonda's like, excuse me, I can't, like, I'm driving here and I have no clue what I'm doing. And so we end up having these guys make it back into town. And so now we have them just kind of going into the Walter Chang's place, his store. And so we end up having them coming up with a like like a name for these things, and they weirdly end up also having like people taking pictures with the snake part. And so uh so they end up starting to come. I bit my tongue weirdly. So they end up are trying to come up with a name of this thing. They're like snakeoids, like maybe it should be graboids. Yeah, graboids. Like you guys are gonna regret if we don't come up with a name for this. So they're like, I don't give a crap about the name. Like I just want it dead, because they're trying to figure out like where it's coming from. Where did it come from? Because while Rhonda, Earl, uh, and Valentine were out just trying to figure out like, well, like it has to be some kind of like old thing that just all of a sudden just awakened now. And like Earl is saying, I think it's from outer space. I don't think this is a local thing. I think it's from outer space. And so they're coming up with like some kind of conclusion of where this thing came from. So eventually what ends up happening is their massive Pepsi cooler ends up all of a sudden going off, making a lot of noise. And so all of a sudden we end up having Walter Chang, who ends up getting killed, eaten by a graboid. And so we now have everybody just kind of scrambling to get to their like respective houses. If we don't have the one pogo girl who I guess is trying to break a world record on her pogo, and we have both uh, Valentine and Earl talking to uh, what is the girl's name? Um, Nancy, and saying that hey, like we're not selling firewood anymore. Like if anything, they were going on and leaving town because both Valentine and Earl were kind of sick of all the odd jobs that they had to do, and they were hoping to get some kind of money together to eventually leave town. And so eventually Valentine and Earl had to haggle for that whole snake thing that they pulled from their car, and they ended up haggling for $15 for it. They're like, yeah, $15. We got a pretty good bargain there. Because eventually, the more side jobs they were doing, the more they're like, well, hey, like, uh, we're definitely gonna try and get as much money as we can because we only have like $3 between the both of us, and eventually they were gonna try and get more. So we we go on and have Walter Chang, who is dead, and so eventually we have it here where it starts to become that being in this store really just doesn't help them anymore. That all of a sudden the tremors are starting to go on and starting to hear the sound of these people's footsteps. And so they're wanting to go on and break through this wood flooring to make their way into this store. So now all of a sudden everybody's going on and trying to go from uh, these certain uh, aisles to eventually climb onto the roof of this store. And so everybody is to go onto their roof, and we now have Valentine that's basically telling everybody, hey, get on your roof, get on the roof of your house, because Melvin is like, hey, what are you guys talking about? And so, like, hey, get on your roof. And so eventually Melvin is to kind of get attacked by a tremor, but he gets on his roof and he seems to be safe. We eventually have the one girl, like Nancy's daughter, who is still pogoing away. And eventually Valentine has to kind of run to save her and then eventually tell this girl and her mother to get on the roof. So we we go on and have these guys who, of course, are on the roof, and all of a sudden Bert is like calling them on the radio to see like, hey, what the heck is going on? Who's running this store? And so we have Valentine who goes and takes the radio and is telling Bert what's going on for him to just get on his roof. And we have Bert who's just like, seriously? Like, man, I got all kinds of manpower here. And Valentine's like, you don't get it. Like, like these things are like, they're under the ground, like these big massive things. Like, it's not just snakes, it's more than that. So to the point of when they go on and they bash one through that concrete wall, they go and they like dig it out to realize how big and massive it is, and that there's little kind of like fins on it. Like, it's kind of a fin equivalent, but I guess like the fin part of it kind of helps it kind of burrow its way through the ground. So Bert is on the radio and it's like, well, like, nah, like, I think we'll be fine. All of a sudden, this graboid comes smashing through this wall, and so now all of a sudden, both Heather and Bert is like, God Almighty! And Valentine's like, yeah, like Bert's got one of them. Because Heather goes on and puts these shell casings in this machine to be broken down, I guess. And so that's when the graboid comes on down. And so now they're taking every single thing of gun on this wall and they're just blasting away at this thing, just filling it with bullets to the point where I think Heather at one point shoots a flare gun into this thing. And I'm like, ah. So Bert goes on and gets this elephant gun weirdly from this casing, and Bert ends up getting this elephant gun and shooting it with that. I guess Bert doesn't conveniently have a bazooka, because why would he? So Bert goes on and gets this elephant gun, and it seems to take this thing down. And Bert is like, hey, we killed one. Like, yeah. So and so Valentine is telling everybody that Bert killed one, and we have the weird, goofy, like, whenever Melvin is to have some kind of line, it's always some goofy thing where he's like, "You go, dude," or some goofy thing like that. So, and everybody's like, "Yeah, like he did it, yeah." And so now Valentine is asking Bert, it's like, well, hey, do you think you can get the other ones? And Bert's like, I don't think so. Because they end up getting finally on their roof, and like these things just keep on like circling around the house, but they're too far under the ground for them to be able to shoot it even with the elephant gun. So uh, so both Bert and Heather are concocting some kind of bomb, or some kind of bomb-like thing that's kind of a handheld kind of thing to eventually go after these uh, graboids. So we go on and we eventually have this graboid continuing to circle this house, and we have that that we start to have these graboids trying to kind of push around these houses, trying to eventually cave in certain roofs, and all of a sudden, one of the graboids tries to do that with Bert's house, and that's when Bert goes on and is to toss this thing of dynamite into this graboid's mouth, and it blows up and kills one of them. It's like, ha ha! So, uh, I think there's one more death that happens somewhere. I swear there is. Because I think Nestor dies somewhere. Uh, yeah, I think Nestor dies somewhere. Um, so let's cover that. I'm trying to think where it is. Oh, um, weirdly, it's right after Bert was to go on and shoot the first graboid. We end up having Nestor, who is on his trailer, and so we have this trailer kind of rocking back and forth because it's kind of the weakest out of all the houses. So Nestor is on top of this trailer and he's kind of holding on, but then eventually his trailer tips over and Nestor is now on the ground, and so Nestor is going on and running, and all he can find is this massive tire to just kind of be on. And we have Valentine that's telling Nestor, it's like, dude, that's not it. And then Nestor ends up just getting sucked through this tire. And Melvin goes on and is telling these guys, you gotta do something. Like, I was just like, it feels like Melvin is the Bill Paxton of this movie, where he's gonna say, "It's game over, man. It's game over." He's like the Bill Paxton from Aliens. Aliens. He's that guy. Weirdly here. So what their plan is now, their big, massive idea of a plan, is they want to try and go and find a vehicle that is to be heavy enough to where these graboids won't be able to take it down. And they're like, well, hey, man, the bulldozer. The bulldozer has to be the strongest thing. And so if the bulldozer goes and takes the trailer that has like tires that are like flat, but it doesn't matter. Like the bulldozer will just carry everything. I think they end up calling it the cat. So the plan is for them to go on and have this tractor go and continue to drive in one direction. And while that's going on, we'll have Valentine, because he just does everything in this film, go and run to make it to the bulldozer. And so we also have at this point that we have uh, the grad student who's Rhonda is at this water tower at this point, because we did have her at some part of this movie while they're trying to run away from this graboid. She ends up going on and getting these barbed wire kind of rigged around her leg, and then the graboid tries to grab this fence and is almost trying to get, of course, Rhonda. And so Valentine ends up having to forcibly have Rhonda take off her pants, and when they make it back into the store, we have, I think, Miguel go on and give uh, Rhonda this pair of jeans. So that's the only thing that I think I like technically forgot, but heaven forbid I know exactly where that moment came and gone and whatever. So Miguel is being hoisted down to start this tractor, and so now Erla's to say that he's gonna go because he's faster, and Valentine's like I think I'm faster. So they go on paper rock scissors for it, and Valentine's like, well, I guess like I lost, so I should go, right? And so we have Valentine who punches Earl in the chest and then runs off to go and do this. So Valentine starts running, or Valentine starts running. All of a sudden, the tractor is to eventually stop, and so like, oh crap! So, and weirdly, we have conveniently Valentine who stops right as the tractor does, and he's like, "What do I do? Where do I go?" So all of a sudden, the graboid is right where Valentine is. Valentine. Uh, I don't know what to call him. Like Kevin Bacon. Here we go. So I could probably call him by his last name, McKee. Mickey. Basically, that's Mckee. Mickey. Mickey. Pretty close. Um, so Mickey goes on and is to start running and then stops conveniently at the same time the tractor does, and eventually the graboid is to be there, and Mickey keeps kind of lifting his foot to avoid having the graboid realize he's there. And so now the town needs to realize that they need to make noise to persuade this graboid to make its way back to town. So Rhonda goes on and is to go and break this one pipe so that way water comes spraying out of this water tower. So all of a sudden we end up having Graboid make it to the water tower, and it grabs this ladder and tosses down this ladder. So they're like, hey, good idea, good job. So that leads McKee to go on to go and get this bulldozer, and so he easily gets it and goes on to, I think, at first go and retrieve Rhonda, and so they go and they get everybody in town, and they get eventually Bert and Heather, who are now like putting together these bombs, and like they're packing all kinds of stuff because Bert's like, we'll probably need all kinds of firepower, and supposedly they have a number of years of food just stored up at their house. But we go on and we have the bulldozer kind of pushing this trailer, and so they go on, and all of a sudden we have the graboids who are off in the distance coming up with some plan supposedly, and that plan is to create a trap for these people to kind of make it so that this bulldozer and this trailer are to eventually be stuck where they are, and we eventually have some certain people start to fall out of this thing. So the big plan is to now figure out how to kill, of course, what is left of these graboids. And so now we go on and we have everybody just kind of running for this rock, and I think they end up using the stick of dynamite uh, as a fishing kind of thing. They end up tying a stick of dynamite with a thing of rope, and they kind of go and they toss this thing out and they fish for it. I know in the sequel they end up using these like small motorized cars to then have the Tremors eat those, and then the bomb ends up going off because they like perfectly do a time detonation bomb like thing. It gets more complicated in the sequels. So, but yeah, so they take this rope, and so they go on, and Earl is to kind of do his weird lasso thing and to toss the bomb out there, and is to kind of fishing lure, uh, get this graboid to eat this bomb and die and explode. So all of a sudden they try to do this yet again, and so this time around we end up having it to where the graboid ends up chucking back the bomb to these people, and that bomb all of a sudden ends up setting off all the other bombs to where the only bomb that they have left is Valentine's bomb. And now we have Valentine, we have Rhonda, and we have Earl. Because of this huge, massive bomb explosion, they're all of a sudden all out of the. They're all like in the ground. They're on the ground. They're not on the actual mountains that they were to um, be holding off of. We also had the one moment where Earl was complaining about he could have been really safe at his home, and it seemed like they were going to be stuck in this mountain for a very long time, or this rock for a very long time. And so Earl is saying, like, man, like these things could have eventually have figured out how to get into your home and get to you, and you would have been dead. So it's lucky that we had this plan here because you are still alive right here now. So Valentine has an idea. So what he decides to do is he is just to decide to run, and so Earl is going to run alongside of him, and we now have Rhonda who is to realize that she has the lighter, so now she's running alongside them, and we have Valentine who's weirdly coming up with a plan of just having it be that that of course this lighter can fuse this bomb, and then Valentine is to perfectly toss this bomb to all of a sudden it's to kill this graboid. But the thing that actually happens is kind of like the concrete wall thing. We have the graboid that just consistently keep on going to where this graboid doesn't realize that there is a cliff where he is going and uh, tunneling to. So all of a sudden, this graboid is digging so quickly that he doesn't realize there's a cliff there, and all of a sudden we have this graboid going off this cliff, and so now Valentine is like, "Hey, can you fly, you sucker?" The graboid ends up crushing and like crushing, I guess, on the impact of things. And so they're like, yeah, I think we got them all, because I guess there was only 3 of them, because Rhonda early on was to say that there has to, of course, be only 3 of these things, because she could see the seismology maps and see that there's only three of them supposedly. So, which I honestly think there's actually four here. Yeah, I think there's actually four. So yeah, four. So maybe after they killed one, that means three, but still. Uh, yeah, I think after they killed one, they realized that there's probably going to be only three left. Maybe that's the whole uh, reasoning for them figuring out that there's only three now. So with that said, after they think that they've killed all the tremors or all the graboids. I just want to keep calling them tremors. I just do. It's just it sounds better of a name. Graboids just sounds so goofy. It's kind of like when I heard about the actual name of the aliens and aliens. They're to be called like exomorphs. I'm like, why not just call them alien? Like, why do you have to have a specific name for a thing? Like, I'm sure probably the Predator character probably isn't called Predator. It's probably like, oh no, that's Operus Scubushi, blah blah. I'm like, what? Like, why is that Predator being called that? Um, Maybe eventually I'll have to Google it at some point because I'm probably going to be doing more Predator movies at some point, and I'll eventually find out. Oh yeah, the Predator actually had a name, and it's Phil or something like that. I don't know. So so now everybody is to seem all good and well and fine. And so now still Earl and Valentine are wanting to leave this town. And Valentine is thinking that they can go off and eventually find possibly some news or magazine people, and maybe they can get on the cover of possibly People. And Earl's like, no, I want to get on the cover of National Geographic. And so the real thing that has to be focused on here is that Valentine is to realize that he still is to need to seal the deal with Rhonda here. So we end up going on to have Valentine going and talking to Rhonda, and eventually this conversation leads in them kissing, and I'm assuming going off to run off together to eventually not be in the sequel film, where I think Earl has to justify why Valentine isn't in the sequel film when he's going and talking to the new recruit in that film, who is to basically be that variation of Valentine. So, who desperately needs Earl to come and wipe out all these graboids because evidently they are to like respout out or respout back up. So, with that said, I think I've covered most of this movie, but I didn't. I really didn't cover the dialogue at the end there. Um, but yeah, so with that said, I think that covers most of this. I think Valentine and Earl at the end were kind of really interested in possibly finding these monsters and making a pretty sweet deal out of them to get some money off of this. So, like, they're thinking that this is a gold mine. And I think eventually people did have this place be like the Graboid Central, where eventually they tried to make some merchandise and try to make a buck off of it, but like I don't know, it just really didn't. It didn't turn a huge profit of things. But anyways, I think I'm gonna get out of here. I think I've talked long enough because this is an hour and a half long movie, anyways. So why should I talk for an hour about this? So I don't know. Like I just had fun with this movie. Like I guess I didn't do an overall grading. I guess I can do that at the end of this now. Like, I would say that this is like this honestly has to be a passable movie for me. Like, I think this movie just has such a cult following that I think really it doesn't need to be graded. I think people will just go into this movie regardless. Hence why I don't think I graded it. Just because like it's Tremors. Like, I can see me grading the later films that come after this, but I think this movie, like, I think it's good enough for people to want to watch it, want to rewatch it, and eventually just have fun with this film, whatever that means. And, like, I think it's just kind of a middle of the road film where it's not exactly a bad film, but it's just so middle of the road. Um, and like this movie just kind of brings me back to a lot of other old films. Like, it kind of gives me like Critters vibes, or kind of gives me those like old monster movie vibes that I really thoroughly enjoy. So yeah, I think that's all that I want to say about Tremors, and hopefully I'll go on and possibly go and talk about any of these other parts and movies and whatever, as long as they're popular for whatever reason. But I just wanted to do this. Like, I just wanted to watch this movie. Plus, it was convenient that it was only an hour and a half long film. So I was like, heck yeah, I'll watch an hour and a half long film, because anything else was like 2 to 3 hours long. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, I need to not have a film be like multiple hours long. And I know those seem to be popular right now, but good God, I just needed to take a break from doing all these really long films that I'm like, man, I just need a day. Just give me a day, and I will get right back to those 2 to 3 hour to whatever hour freaking films. Um, but I just wanted something short today. So I'm going to go out of my way to get out of here. So goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.